If you look at what just happened in Ottawa, it doesn't look like politics. It doesn't even look like strategy. It looks like a takeover. Quiet, surgical, almost invisible. And by the time Washington figured out what was happening, it was already too late. For decades, Canada's parliament has been a mess. A beautiful democratic, frustrating mess. Minority governments begging for votes. Coalition deals cut in back rooms. Every single bill, every single budget, a knife fight on the floor of the House of Commons. That's how Canada works. That's how Canada has always worked. But as of Wednesday morning, that system is being gutted. Not with a revolution, not with a crisis. With a phone call, Mark Carney just moved 2 seats away from total unchecked absolute control of the Canadian government. 2 seats. And the way he got there should keep Donald Trump awake tonight. Because while Trump was tweeting about tariffs, while he was pounding his chest about trade deficits, while he was calling Carney a globalist puppet, Carney was doing something Trump never saw coming. He was building a machine, a political machine designed to do one thing and one thing only. Survive Donald Trump, outlast him, and bury him. And the consequences of what just happened aren't coming. They're already here. They're already in the markets. They're already in the Pentagon. And they're about to land right in your wallet. Trump has no idea what just hit him. His advisors are scrambling and the media once again is missing the real story. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what Carney just pulled off, why it's more dangerous than any tariff, and why the relationship between the United States and Canada just changed forever. Not next month, not next year, Wednesday. So, let's cut through the noise. Here is exactly what went down. A woman named Lori Idlout stood up in Ottawa on Wednesday morning. She represents Nunavut. If you don't know what Nunavut is, you should. It's the Canadian Arctic. It's a territory so vast it could swallow Texas, California, and Montana combined and still have room left over. It sits on top of oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals, and the Northwest Passage, which is the single most strategically important shipping lane of the 21st century. Idlout didn't retire. She didn't go independent. She walked across the floor of the House of Commons and joined Mark Carney's Liberal Party just like that. No drama, no press conference, just a statement and a handshake. And if you're sitting in Dallas or Detroit or Denver right now thinking, who cares? One politician switched teams. Then you're making the exact same mistake the White House is making right now. Because Lori Idlout isn't just any politician. She's the 4th one. The 4th opposition member to defect to Carney since November. 4th. 1 defection is news. 2 is a pattern. 3 is a strategy. 4 is a conquest. Let me show you the math because the math is everything. Before Wednesday, Carney's Liberals had 169 seats in a 343-seat House of Commons. That's a minority. That means every single thing Carney wants to do, every retaliatory tariff, every emergency defense bill, every trade pivot has to be negotiated, watered down, or etched, and begged through a hostile parliament. It's like trying to fight a heavyweight boxing match with both hands tied behind your back. Now he has 170. He needs 172 for an outright majority. 2 seats. And here's where it gets terrifying for Washington. There are 3 special elections on April 13th. 3 empty seats. All 3 were previously held by Liberals. 2 of them are safe seats. Locked down. Done. If the Liberals win just 2 of those 3, and they will, Mark Carney will have a majority government. No more begging, no more compromises, no more opposition veto. He will be able to pass any law he wants, any budget he wants, any retaliatory measure he wants with a snap of his fingers. And he could hold that power until October 2029. 4 years. 4 years of a Canadian Prime Minister with a loaded gun and no one to stop him from pulling the trigger. Do you understand what just happened? While Donald Trump was playing the daily news cycle game, throwing punches on Truth Social, picking fights with reporters, Carney was playing an entirely different game. He was collecting seats one by one, silently, methodically, like a chess player moving pawns into position while his opponent is busy flipping the table. Trump is fighting today. Carney is building tomorrow. And tomorrow is almost here. Now, let me show you the receipts because this isn't just political theater. The consequences are real and they're already moving. Receipt number 1, the Arctic weapon. This is the one that should terrify the Pentagon. When IDL crossed the floor, she didn't talk about party loyalty. She didn't talk about tax policy or health care. She talked about sovereignty. Her exact words, and I want you to hear this carefully, were, with new threats against our sovereignty and pressures on the well-being of people throughout the North, we need a strong and ambitious government. New threats against our sovereignty. She is talking about the United States of America. She is talking about the President of the United States who has publicly, repeatedly on camera mused about making Canada the 51st state, who has called the border an artificially drawn line, who has sent his people on television to talk about annexation like it's a real estate deal. That's not a joke to the people who live in the Arctic. That's an existential threat. And Carney just absorbed their political representative into his coalition. He wrapped the Arctic in a liberal flag, looked directly at Washington, and said, "This is ours. Touch it and find out." The Northwest Passage alone is worth fighting over. As the ice melts, it's becoming the shortest shipping route between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Whoever controls it controls global trade for the next century. China knows this. Russia knows this. And now Carney is making damn sure the United States doesn't get to just take it. Receipt number 2, the defense bombshell. In his statement about IDLA joining, Carney didn't talk about unity. He didn't talk about bipartisanship. He talked about military spending. He specifically mentioned increasing defense spending to protect the Canadian Arctic. Let that sink in. A Canadian Prime Minister talking about military spending, not to support NATO, not to back up the Pentagon, to defend against American pressure. That is a sentence that has never been spoken in the history of the USC relationship. Never. For 70 years, Canada's military has essentially been an extension of the American security umbrella. Canadian soldiers trained with Americans. Canadian ships sailed with American fleets. Canadian jets flew under American command. That era is ending. Carney is telling the world, we're not spending to help America anymore. We're spending to protect ourselves from America. If Canada starts building Arctic military bases, buying submarines, deploying surveillance systems, and commissioning icebreakers, they're not just defending territory. They're creating facts on the ground that make Trump's annexation fantasy not just absurd, but physically impossible. You can't tweet your way past a military installation. You can't Truth Social your way through a submarine fleet. Carney is militarizing the response to Trump, and he's doing it before he even officially has his majority. Imagine what he does after April 13th for seat number 3. The recruiter-in-chief. This is the part that should make Republican strategists lose sleep. Carney isn't just gaining seats. He's weaponizing Trump. Every single time Trump escalates, every tariff threat, every annexation joke, every bombastic press conference, another Canadian politician crosses the floor. 4 since November. 4. The pattern is undeniable. Trump threatens, Carney gains a seat. Trump tweets. Carney gains a seat. Trump pounds the table. Carney gains a seat. It's like watching a man punch a wall and not realizing the wall gets thicker with every hit. Trump is literally building Carney's majority for him. He is Carney's best recruiter. Every time he opens his mouth about Canada, the opposition in Ottawa gets weaker because their voters don't want dissent right now. They don't want debate. They don't want compromise. They want a wartime leader. They want someone who will stand up and fight. And Carney is standing right there with open arms saying, "Come to me. I'm the one who won't blink." The opposition parties are hollowing out. The NDP is bleeding members. The Conservatives can't gain traction because every time they criticize Carney, they look like they're siding with Trump. Canadian politics has been reduced to one question. Are you with Carney or are you with the Americans? And nobody in Canada right now wants to be with the Americans. Trump did this. He created the conditions for a Canadian strongman. He manufactured the crisis that justified the consolidation. And he doesn't even realize it. Now, let's talk about what happens when Carney gets his majority, because this is where it gets real. This is where it hits your gas tank, your grocery bill, and your 401k. Right now, Trump can pressure Canada because the Canadian government is slow. It's clunky. Every retaliatory measure has to survive a parliamentary vote. Every emergency budget has to get opposition support. That's a weakness. That's a crack in the armor. Trump's people know it. They've been exploiting it. They've been counting on the fact that Carney can't move fast enough to respond effectively. But the moment Carney gets seat 172, that crack seals shut. He can pass legislation in days, not months. He can redirect energy exports. He can sign emergency trade deals with Europe and Asia. He can impose retaliatory tariffs on American goods without a single opposition vote. He can fast-track pipeline approvals to ship Canadian oil to the Pacific. He becomes, for all practical purposes, an economic wartime president with a 4-year mandate and no checks on his power. You can negotiate with a weak prime minister. You can bully a minority government. But you cannot bully a man who has a majority, a mandate, and nothing left to lose. And here's the thing Trump doesn't understand. Time is on Carney's side. Trump has elections. He has news cycles. He needs a win by Thursday so it plays on Fox by Friday. Carney doesn't need a win today. He doesn't need a win this month. He needs to hold the line until April 13th, win 2 seats, and then he has 4 years. 4 years to diversify Canada's economy away from the United States. 4 years to build Arctic defenses. 4 years to sign trade deals with every country that's tired of American bullying. 4 years to turn Canada from America's dependent partner into America's strategic rival. Trump is playing a sprint. Carney is running a marathon, and the marathon runner just hit mile 24. So why should you care? Maybe you're watching this in Michigan. Maybe you're watching this in Pennsylvania. Maybe you're in a factory town that depends on Canadian parts crossing that border every single day. Here's why this matters to you personally. If Carney gets his majority and pivots Canadian energy exports to Asia, gas prices in the Midwest don't just go up, they explode. The refineries in the Gulf Coast are designed to process heavy Canadian crude. You can't just switch suppliers like changing a Netflix password. It takes years. It takes billions. And in the meantime, you're paying $68 a gallon. If Carney fast-tracks trade deals with Europe and redirects Canadian auto parts away from Detroit, the factory that employs your neighbor doesn't just slow down. It shuts down. Those parts don't exist anywhere else. You can't 3D print a transmission. If Canadian lumber, fertilizer, and agricultural products get redirected, the price of building a house goes up. The price of feeding your family goes up. The price of everything goes up. And here's the cruel irony. The people who get hurt first aren't in Ottawa. They're in Ohio. They're in Wisconsin. They're in every swing state that Trump needs to win. Carney knows this. He's a banker. He's done the math. He knows exactly which American pain points to press. He's not throwing bombs. He's using a scalpel and he's aiming at the ballot box. So, where do we go from here? 3 scenarios. Scenario A, the fortress. Carney wins his majority on April 13th. He locks down Parliament. He passes a massive emergency budget. Defense spending surges. Trade deals with Europe and Asia get fast-tracked. Canadian energy starts flowing west to the Pacific instead of south to the US. The border doesn't close, but it gets cold, very cold. Trade continues at reduced levels. Both economies bleed, but Canada diversifies and survives. The US loses its most reliable trading partner. Not for a year, not for a political cycle, forever. This is the most likely outcome. Scenario B, the Overreach. Carney gets his majority and the power goes to his head. He nationalizes energy exports. He cancels American contracts. He turns Canada into an economic fortress that's so isolated it starts to suffocate. The Canadian economy buckles. Trump uses the chaos to justify even harsher measures. Maybe even sanctions. Maybe even a real confrontation over the Arctic. This is the nightmare scenario. Power without restraint is a loaded gun with no safety. And Carney has never governed with a majority before. The temptation to go too far will be whispering in his ear every single day. Scenario C, the grand bargain. Carney gets his majority, picks up the phone, and calls Trump from a position of strength. He says, "Let's talk. But this time, I set the agenda. A new trade deal, a new defense pact, a new energy framework. Both sides save face, both sides win something." This is the dream scenario. But it requires Donald Trump to sit across the table from a man he's been publicly humiliating and treat him as an equal. And Trump doesn't do equals. Trump does winners and losers. And he will never ever admit that the Prime Minister of Canada just outmaneuvered him. I think we're heading for Scenario A, drifting dangerously towards Scenario B and praying for Scenario C. Here's what I know for certain. We are watching something that has never happened before. A Canadian Prime Minister is consolidating power specifically to fight the United States, not to fight China, not to fight Russia, to fight America. That sentence should stop you cold because it means the old world is dead. The world where Canada was the friendly neighbor, the quiet ally, the country that always said sorry and always said yes. That world is gone. It didn't die slowly. It was killed. And Donald Trump held the weapon. Carney didn't create this crisis. Trump did. But Carney is using it. He's using it to build something no Canadian leader has ever had. Unchecked power, backed by public fear, justified by a foreign threat, and aimed directly at the United States. The question isn't whether Carney gets his majority, he will. The question is what kind of leader he becomes when he has it. Does he become the steady hand that protects Canadian sovereignty, or does he become the strongman who uses a crisis to cement permanent control? Is this leadership, or is this a power grab wearing a flag? Trump picked a fight with Canada. Canada didn't just fight back. It reorganized its entire government, absorbed the opposition, militarized its Arctic, and built a political machine designed to outlast, outmaneuver, and outplay the most powerful country on earth. And they did it in 6 months. While Trump was tweeting, do you think Carney is defending his country or seizing his moment? Is this the strong leadership Canada needs, or is it something darker? Drop a comment below. I read every single one. And if you want to see what happens on April 13th when those 3 special elections hit and the balance of power on this continent potentially shifts for good, make sure you are subscribed. You are going to want to see this. History is moving fast. Don't blink. Because while you were watching the surface, Carney was building something beneath it. To understand what he's actually creating, you have to understand the man himself. Mark Carney isn't a politician. He's a central banker. He ran the Bank of Canada through the 2008 collapse and the Bank of England through Brexit. He doesn't think in speeches or crowd sizes. He thinks in liquidity, leverage, and market confidence. Donald Trump measures power in square footage and steel. Carney measures it in the invisible currents that can make that steel worthless overnight. They are playing different games entirely. Think about what Carney has actually assembled. He has taken a weak minority government and turned it into a war cabinet in waiting. He recruited from the left with Idlout, gaining the Arctic's voice. He recruited from the center. He has built a coalition not of parties, but of purpose. Every person who joins him does so with the same stated reason, the American threat. Loyalty to him is becoming synonymous with patriotism. That is not politics. That is the architecture of unified command. And when dissent starts to look like disloyalty, the definition of protection becomes whatever the leader says it is. Does protection mean matching Trump's tariffs? Or preemptive strikes on American industry? Does building Arctic bases mean declaring a military exclusion zone around the Northwest Passage, daring the U.S. Navy to test it? Does diversifying trade mean canceling oil contracts with American refiners in a polar vortex, letting families freeze while tankers wait for China? Carney is a technocrat, not a populist. But technocrats with unchecked power tend to optimize the humanity out of the equation. They see problems, not people. That cold brain of his could become a weakness if he starts treating 150 million interconnected lives as variables to be managed. Now look at Washington. Inside the White House, the word isn't concern. It's bewilderment. They don't understand how a country they've taken for granted is slipping away. Their whole strategy was simple: squeeze Canada, they'll cave. It worked before. But Carney didn't come to the table. He built his own table in a different room and invited the world. The EU, Japan, the UK, he is weaving a web that makes America the odd man out in its own hemisphere. And here is the detail that should terrify every American manufacturer. Canadian oil is not interchangeable. Refineries in Texas built for heavy crude cannot just switch to domestic light crude. It takes billions and months. If Carney prioritizes Asia, American refineries pay global spot prices. Your gas bill explodes. Same with lumber. Canada supplies a third of U.S. softwood. If that redirects to China, the cost of a new home jumps tens of thousands of dollars. Mortgage payments become unaffordable. The housing market seizes. And Trump is left explaining why a 2x4 doubled under his watch. Carney isn't trying to win a trade war. He's making it so painful for the American middle class that the political support for it evaporates. He is aiming at the ballot box, through your wallet. The Arctic is the key Idlout turned. Beneath it sits 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of its gas. The Northwest Passage is becoming a viable shipping lane. Russia has militarized its coast. China is building icebreakers. And now Canada will too. But here's the twist. The US and Canada have a decades-old dispute over the passage. The US says it's international waters. Canada says it's internal. For 50 years, it was a polite disagreement. But what happens when a Canadian Prime Minister with a majority and a mandate decides to enforce Canadian law? What happens when a Chinese warship transits, the US wants to follow, and Canada says no? Does the Navy challenge it? Does a Canadian warship intercept? This is not fiction. This is the logical endpoint. And Trump accelerated it. Every 51st state joke unified the North against the South. He did what no Russian strategist could. He made America the threat. So, is Carney defending his country or seizing his moment? Both. He sees an existential threat and is responding. But he was built for crisis. He will not waste it. The question is whether Canadian democracy can survive a leader so effective at consolidating power. Can it survive 4 years of wartime consensus? Or will it atrophy, leaving a strong man and no memory of how to be anything else? April 13th is the inflection point. When Carney gets seat 172, the old Canada dies. A new one is born. More assertive, more militarized, more suspicious. Trump lit a fire. Carney is building an arsenal. And we are standing in the middle, watching the only alliance that kept this continent stable for a century turn to ash. Drop a comment. Is Carney a defender or a danger? I read them all. And subscribe. April 13th is coming, and when the balance of power shifts, you need to see it to understand it. I'll see you then.
गांव से शहर तक एक नया रंग चले ना रुक